channel, Homeschooling Through the Chaos. If you're new here, I'm Michelle and I am a homeschooling mama of 3 with 1 on the way. In today's video, I just wanted to share a little bit about my views on homeschooling from a teacher's perspective. So before we jump into the video, if you have not done so already, make sure to like and subscribe. It really does help me, my channel, and my family out when you do that. So for those of you that have already subscribed, thank you so much for following our journey so far. So before we get started, I do want to say that this video is not intended to bash anyone or judge anyone for the choices that anyone makes. I just wanted to share my own personal experience in hopes that it helps someone else. Everyone's circumstances is different and everyone's experience is different. So I do just encourage everyone to do your research and do what you feel is best for you and your family. So little background on myself. So I have about 6 years of experience teaching. I've taught grades K to 3rd. I've taught in a public school setting as well as a charter cyber school. I have experience in ESL and special education, and I also homeschool 3 of my kids, and we are going into our 3rd year of homeschooling this year. So I broke it down the video into 2 different parts. So the first part is my experience as a teacher, and then the second part is my experience from a mom's perspective. So I've always wanted to go into teaching for as long as I can remember, and it took me years and a lot of sacrifices to be able to finally get my degree and be able to turn that dream into a reality. Now, I don't regret my career choice or my decision to go into teaching. My experience wasn't necessarily a horrible one. I loved my students, I loved my coworkers. I had really supportive parents throughout most of the years that I was teaching, but I will say that becoming a teacher did strongly influence my decision to homeschool my kids. And here's a few reasons why. So number 1 is that we need to teach to the test. So this is essentially true for all grade levels because even kindergarten has boxes that we need to check in order to get them ready for 1st grade. But it's especially true for the higher grade levels that do have a standardized test that they need to take at the end of the year. So for me, when I was teaching 3rd grade, this was the hardest part for me because no matter how flexible you are in how many adjustments you make, there's only a certain amount that you can do in order to get these kids ready for their exam. So sadly, if you have kids who are just not getting it and you've already pushed your material back a few days, you need to move on because you need to at least introduce them to the new things that are going to be on their exams. So I can do a whole video on my take on standardized testing, but the reality is that teaching this way is just horrible, not only for the kids, but the teachers too, because of the amount of pressure that it adds on them. My first year when I got my kids' scores back, I cried my eyes out because I felt like a complete failure. I felt like I did not do what I needed to do for my kids, which in reality was not true. We were still in a pandemic. The first half of the year we were virtual, and then the second half we came back hybrid, where we were doing both virtual and in person at the same time. So even though my kids had learned and they progressed and they grew, that was not celebrated because they didn't reach certain numbers on their exams. So number 2 is a lack of support for the teachers. So this is an issue in education in general. In my case, I actually had really good admin. So I loved my admin team. They really cared about their teachers, their staff. But at the end of the day, if they don't have the resources that they need, there's no way that they can provide us with the resources that we need. So for example, there was one year where I had really rough behavioral issues in our classroom. And luckily I had a co-teacher and we leaned on each other when we needed help. But there were days that we would leave home in tears because of how rough the day was. And our school just didn't have the support that we needed. So the majority of the time, we had to take care of it on our own. And this is rough for the rest of the class because they're not getting the type of education that they need and that they should be getting, because we're trying to put out all these other little fires throughout the day. And the other thing is that we're also going through a huge issue with teacher shortages right now. And what they would end up doing in our case was, if we had a teacher that was absent and we didn't have a sub that day, we would have to combine our classes together. So it's hard enough being one person teaching 30 kids. Now you're one person teaching 60 kids. So there's definitely no way that those kids are getting any one-on-one time or the type of attention that they should be getting, because it's just physically impossible, not to mention stressful. So those were some rough days there. Number 3 is lack of creativity / teacher input. So this kind of differs from school to school. We were a previous military family and we moved around a lot. So I was able to teach in a few different schools with a few different settings. So some schools are a little more lenient in regards to what you teach and how you teach it. Other schools were a little more stricter. They have their set curriculum, what you teach and how you teach it, and you have to stick with it. So let's say there's something on there that you might not agree with. You still have to teach that because that's part of your curriculum. So in a sense, our hands were kind of tied when it came to certain things. The other thing is that we spent so many years in school being taught about the importance of being able to tailor our lessons to meet the needs of our students. And yet when we go into the classroom, it's a lot harder to be able to actually implement that than people think. Our kids were not meant to be in a box. Not everyone thinks the same, not everyone learns the same. So when you're giving us a set curriculum and telling us that this is what you need to teach and this is how you need to teach it, and then our planning time gets cut or taken away completely, it's a lot harder to be able to actually tailor those things to our kids to be able to teach them the way that they need to be taught. Now, from a mom's perspective, my daughter was a huge factor in our decision to homeschool. So my daughter, Michaela, she was recently diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. And like many other kids, COVID really had a huge effect on her. So she was virtual for a year and a half when COVID happened. And that did not work for her at all. Like, she did not do well in a virtual setting. And unfortunately, I was teaching full-time during that time period. So I wasn't able to help her the way that I would have liked to. And she really fell so far behind. So when she went back into the public school and in-person school, she really struggled to the point where she just does not like school. She didn't think she was good enough. It really affected her self-esteem. And then after being a teacher myself and experiencing all the things that we have to deal with as a teacher, I just knew that in that setting, she was not going to be able to learn and thrive the way that I know that she could. So I know that, and this is not the teacher's fault in any way. My daughter when she went back to school, she went to the school where I was teaching. So I knew her teachers and I loved them all, but she just couldn't receive the things that she needed. She couldn't receive the one-on-one time the way that she needed. The way that she learns, she couldn't have that same environment implemented in the school. Like, it just wouldn't work for her. So that was a huge thing for us in leaning towards homeschooling. And my mindset when thinking about this wasn't, oh, I can do this better at home because I'm a teacher. My mindset was, we can teach her better at home, my husband and I, because she's not competing for anyone else's attention. She's not in a room with 30 other kids. She's going to be one-on-one. We can tailor her lessons in a way that can't be done at school. If she needs more hands-on things, we can do that. You need manipulatives, like we can bring those out and take the things out of the workbooks. If she needs extra time, which the majority of the time she does because of her ADHD, she can do it. Like there's no rush. There's nothing for her to compete with. My goal with her right now is just to make her love learning, which is something that was taken away from her. And I am not a fan of standardized testing at all, but she did have to take a test this year because we live in a state where they are required to test at the end of the year. And the progress that she made was insane. Like she went up 3 grade levels just from being taught at home one-on-one. And this was with my husband teaching them because I was still working full time. So it's not to say that you need to be a teacher in order to homeschool. It's to say that it can be done whether you're a teacher with experience or you are a mom that never took a teaching class in your whole entire life. Like you don't need a teaching degree to be able to homeschool your kids. What's important is that one-on-one time with them, that being able to tailor your lessons to the needs of your child. At the end of the day, no one knows your child more than you. No one is going to care about your child more than you. So when you're thinking about, will my kid be better off at home? I would say that if it is a safer environment than the public school or even a private school, then the answer is yes, in my opinion. So I also wanted to touch on socialization. So there's this big misconception that homeschooling kids are just locked up in their homes away from the real world and don't ever see the sunlight. That could not be further from the truth. So the first thing that came to mind when we decided to take the leap and homeschool our kids was the amount of freedom that we now have to be able to go out and do all of the things because we're not held to a certain schedule. We can take the things that we're learning and be able to experience it outside in the real world instead of behind our desk for 8 hours a day. The other thing to keep in mind is that homeschooling is not something new. There's so many families that are homeschooling right now. I was shocked at the amount of programs and meetups that are provided in our area specifically for homeschooling kids. Also, just because your kids homeschool does not mean that they're not entitled to participate in the programs offered by your zone schools. So my daughter, she still participates in softball for our county's team. My kids did baseball last year and they're also in karate, so they still get to participate in those things just like all the other kids. Keep in mind too that not all socialization is good socialization. So yes, there are things that I do not want my kids to be exposed to. So right now my kids are 7, 10, and 12. And if I can help them hold on to their innocence for as long as possible, I'm gonna do everything in my power that I can. So for example, there was an incident where a parent called me during my break to let me know that her child was exposed to inappropriate conversations with his peers during recess time. My heart sank when she told me these things because this happened on my watch. Like, I'm supposed to be caring for these kids. These are 8 and 9 year old at the time. I was teaching third, so these are 8 and 9 year old. And from how she was describing it, it was a pretty graphic conversation that they were having. And the reality is that when there are over 100 kids out in the playground, there's no amount of eyes that can keep an eye on every single one of them. So this is just one of those things that comes with socialization that your kids might be exposed to if they are in that environment. And I know that I can't protect my kids from everything, but if I can mitigate some of those things, I will try my hardest to do that. And as I said earlier, my intention with this video is not to bash or to judge anyone. I completely understand that homeschooling might not be for everyone. Everyone's circumstances and experiences is different. I just wanted to share my experience and what led us to homeschool our kids. And I will say that if you are feeling called to homeschool, it is at least worth looking into. I never thought that we would homeschool our kids. It was never a thought in my mind. It's not something that I grew up with or that I was used to. But once we moved here, I just had this weird feeling that I should consider other options and look into homeschooling. And I did, and we decided, okay, we'll do it for 1 year. And if it doesn't work out for us, we can always go back to public school. We can always re-enroll them. And we're going into our 3rd year, and I honestly do not see us going back ever. My only regret is that we didn't start homeschooling our kids from day 1. And I didn't have the support from my family. I still have family members that don't understand our decision to homeschool because, like I said, it's not something that we're used to. It's not something that they're used to. But you do what is best for your family. No one knows your kids like you do. No one cares for your kids like you do. My kids are thriving and our family is closer than ever. So I absolutely do not regret homeschooling my kids. If you're considering homeschooling, I am going to link some of my favorite books that helped me throughout this journey. Thank you so much for watching my video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and let me know in the comments if you have any questions